Week 5, Regionalism. Regional writing, another expression of the realist movement, resulted from the desire both to preserve a record of distinctive ways of life and to come to terms with the new world that seemed to be replacing these early and allegedly happier times. However, many critics have argued that this literary movement actually contributed to the country's reunification after the Civil War. More practically, regional writing responded to the new market of mass magazines, for which the short story form was ideal, and for which variations of local habits could provide an endless source of narrative. As you've probably already guessed, regionalism was a type of literature that became popular in the mid-19th century to the early 20th century that focused on the characters, dialect, manners, topography, and other features of a particular region. The Oxford Companion of American Literature says that this type of writing finds the dual influence of romanticism and realism, since the author frequently looks away from ordinary life to distant lands, strange customs, or exotic scenes, but retains through minute detail a sense of fidelity and accuracy of description. The most popular form of regionalism is the sketch or short story. Sometimes regionalism is also referred to as local color. However, other critics argue that regionalism and local color stories are separate, the main difference being that regionalism tends to tell the story in a way that observes its characters in a sociological or anthropological manner, while local color stories are more concerned with the setting. It has been said that nothing happens as far as plot goes in local color stories. Instead, we get lots of storytelling that revolves around the community and its rituals. Sarah Orne Jewett serves as a great example of a local colorist. Setting is integral, however, in both categories. There is often an emphasis on the limits imposed by a region's natural surroundings, and the setting can sometimes become a character in itself. Characters typically adhere to the old ways and customs of the region and are marked by their dialect and personality traits common to the area that they live in. Many women initially associated with regionalism expanded their interests to write about the world of women. They include female characters that suggest the capacity of human beings to live independently and with dignity in the face of community pressures, patriarchal power, and material deprivation. Kate Chopin may be thought of as a regional writer interested in the customs, language, and landscapes of the northern Louisiana countryside and downriver New Orleans. But in addition to working with local color, Chopin wrote probing psychological fiction with intriguing female protagonists like Edna Pontellier of The Awakening. Born Catherine O'Flaherty, Chopin grew up in the company of loving, intelligent, independent women after the death of her father when she was only 4 years old. Especially her strong-willed great-grandmother, a compelling and tireless storyteller whose influence may have been central to Chopin's becoming a significant regional writer and novelist. At the age of 19, she married Oscar Chopin and spent the next decade in New Orleans, where her husband first prospered, then failed as a cotton broker. Later, he opened a general store and managed a family cotton plantation in northern Louisiana. After her husband died of swamp fever, Chopin returned to St. Louis permanently in 1884. A year later, her mother died, and at the age of 35, Chopin was left essentially alone to raise her 6 young children. Having recognized the ready market for regional fiction, Chopin decided to fashion a literary career out of her experience of the Creole and Cajun cultures she had come to know. In the relatively few years of her writing career, scarcely more than a decade, she completed 3 novels, more than 150 stories and sketches, and a substantial body of poetry, reviews, and criticism. The influence of her love for French fiction showed in her stories that were much more erotic and guilt-free than the American norm. Chopin's major work, The Awakening, was published in 1899. The novel, which traces the sensual and sexual coming to consciousness of a young woman, predictably aroused hostility among contemporary reviewers. Edna Pontellier is not a woman who demands social, economic, and political equality. Instead, she can appear to be an unrepentant sensualist, leading some critics to charge that the book was trite and sordid, essentially vulgar, and unhealthily introspective and morbid in feeling. Chopin's intent, however, was to describe the tension between the individual erotic inclination and the constraints placed on desire, especially women's sexual desire, by traditional social mores. She told directly and without moral judgment how certain women were beginning to challenge the male-dominated culture that limited all aspects of women's lives, even the lives of comfortably situated women, and tried to control their psyches as well. For this week's discussion, consider the following. Edna proclaims, "I would give my life for my children, but I wouldn't give myself." Is this a paradox, or does her vow make sense? Additionally, in what ways are Edna and Madame Ratignolle character foils? Finally, discuss the symbolic effect of Madame Ratignolle's all-white attire.